and the charter school movement, and I would sort of emphasize the charter school movement as being a place not just for producing the kind of proof points that show that great public education is possible when it's done right. And I should just, as an aside, I spent some time today at Citizens Academy meeting with the teachers there. Students weren't in today. It was a professional development day. And one of the things that I told them was the work that they're doing every day with their students and the miracles that they're producing along with a lot of other schools in Cleveland and around the country is proving to the public that we don't have to give up on this problem, that there are ways that we can solve this if we do it right. So those proof points are crucial. But they've, in a larger sense, the charter school movement has provided sort of a landing pad for lots of people who committed to education but would have driven themselves nuts working in a bureaucracy in an average big city. The kind of people that would have said, forget it, I care about these kids, I care about public education, but I can't put up with this. And you know, a lot of charter school people are quirky people. They don't sit still very well. They want to do everything all the time, and they can't really be welcomed and survive in a lot of public school systems. The charter school movement has provided sort of a support group for them and a place for them to go, and it's having a tremendous impact around the country. I would add to those lists that the New York Times had a couple of other forces that are going on right now. Shifting alliances, particularly in the civil rights communities right now. My organization has done a lot of work with Reverend Al Sharpton in New York and around the country. And the way he describes this is sort of the coalitions that formed in the 1970s between labor, clergy, and the civil rights movement. They formed for all the right reasons then, and they were really productive for everybody involved, and it was very powerful. But the social justice aspects that drove those alliances into being in the first place, these days they're outdated. They're now working against the social justice issues of the children that are in schools that aren't working. And to be able to start seeing civil rights leaders stand up and say, you know, all these people that are saying that education is the civil rights issue of our day, they're right, and we all need to do something about this. Another factor, Teach for America. I know you don't have Teach for America core members working actively. I think there are plenty of alumni that have sort of migrated back to Cleveland. This is an organization that is changing everything in education right now. We're starting to see, particularly this sort of young generation of education reformer will spend several years working in inner city classrooms for Teach for America. Whether they remain teachers or whether they don't, they sort of take that experience with them. And these are the people right now that we're seeing running for school boards around the country. They're running for city councils, running for state legislators. Michelle Rhee, the chancellor of the District of Columbia school system, I think is the first big city schools chancellor who came out of Teach for America. The comparison we always like to make is sort of the Bill Walsh and the San Francisco 49ers, where all of his assistant coaches ended up going on years later to become head coaches, and he really had his greatest impact after he stopped coaching when the people he trained started going and running their own teams. We're starting to see that from Teach for America as well. Another factor which we're starting to see, particularly on the West Coast, is the rise of this voting bloc, the Latina moms. We're starting to see Latina moms more than any other sort of segment of populations that we can poll on electoral issues. They want desperately for their kids to be in safe schools where they get a good education. They don't care whether it's a private school, a charter school, a public school. They just want somebody to make it happen. And it's driving, and it's one of the fastest growing voting blocks around the country. It's having tremendous impact. And other labor unions is the last one that are saying enough is enough on where we are with our schools. Some of the construction and trade unions that are in cities that are seeing tough times and are seeing that their communities themselves, where they're making their livelihood doing their work, are not going to survive if the public school systems don't drastically improve. I'll try to wrap things up here so we can get to questions. Where we're seeing this play out in its most dramatic prism right now is the race to the top competition around the country. This is, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, this is the federal government's way of trying to change the incentives to do reform around the country. No Child Left Behind, if everybody's familiar with that one. It was an idea that the federal government could say, you have to do A, B, C, and D, and the thought was if the federal government mandated it, states and districts would go and do it, and everything would work out well. It didn't really work so well. The No Child Left Behind was premised on the idea that if a district or a state didn't do what the federal government wanted, the federal government would withhold its federal funding for serving poor students. Politically, it turns out it's impossible not to send that money along. So there was no teeth in No Child Left Behind. Despite all the criticism that everybody makes about No Child Left Behind and all the draconian measures that get unleashed, there's really no there there. The federal government this time around tried to change it from sticks to carrots. They basically said, at a time when state legislators all over the country are slashing their budgets, basically said, we've got a pot of money here that you can come and get if you want to try to win this reform competition. It turns out the psychology of legislatures is something we vastly underestimated. We started seeing states tracking what other states were doing. We saw leaders emerge saying, our state ought to be a winner in this, and we ought to do whatever it's going to take. And they generally engaged in this competition in a way that has allowed more, in state legislatures around the country, more change for education reform in the last 10 months than we've seen in the last 10 years. And it's been breathtaking in some of the circumstances. In Colorado, a state where our organization has done a lot of work, they recently passed a teacher evaluation bill that changes the way teachers are evaluated. And this is an area that we spent a lot of time, because we do believe that great teaching is the most important thing that matters on this. And we believe that great teachers ought to be treated much better than they are right now. And right now, in most public school systems, we're not really allowed to acknowledge that some teachers are great. We have to acknowledge that they're all the same. So most places around the country, you evaluate teachers, you can either be satisfactory or unsatisfactory. So if you want great teachers, you can't have them. You can only have satisfactory. And though everybody knows the dance of the lemons kind of thing, if you're a principal and you want to get rid of one of your bad teachers, you have to rate them satisfactory, otherwise nobody else will take them. So you do this sort of con game. You rate everybody that you don't want satisfactory, you get rid of them, you try to get the teachers you want. Years later, if somebody wants to go and try to terminate a really bad teacher, they try, they fail. They go up to in front of an arbitrator and they bring out years worth of satisfactory ratings that all those other principals gave when they moved them around. So the idea of changing the way we evaluate teachers is something that we see as a tremendous leverage point for change. In Colorado, they changed the law so that they still have tenure, but instead of putting the burden on school districts to prove that an ineffective teacher should not get tenure after their first 3 years, the burden is now on the teachers to show that they are effective in order to get that tenure. It's an important first step. My organization believes that we have to follow that up then by saying if we're going to make tenure meaningful and really show that these teachers that have been effective are being rewarded with tenure, we have to then really start treating them like the professionals that they are, and that means our best teachers ought to be making a lot more money than they are right now. This is a way to keep great teachers in the classroom, create the different incentives to make it attractive for highly effective teachers to go into the schools that nobody wants to go into on their own. So where do things go from here? As I said at the beginning, we've only got, I think we've got about 3 years to really push the envelope, and I think people are going to be on to other issues at that point. We have the attention of the president, who seems to find that this issue is a defining issue, and not just an important issue, but politically something that defines what change that you can believe in actually looks like on the ground. The burden now is on the reformers, the people running charter schools, the people that are training teachers, the people who have been saying for years, we have some good ideas, we just need some help in implementing them. As they start to get help from all of these reform-minded politicians, we're going to have to prove that success is within our grasp. We have to let time work in our factor. We are seeing, as I mentioned, through a younger generation of people who are trying to change and to embrace change. The longer we can keep them in the system, the more support there's going to be behind what they're trying to do. We're starting to see a lot more competitive grant competitions from the federal government, where we're saying rather than giving you the same amount we gave you last year, we want you to show you're doing something with the money. This is something that has driven the federal government crazy for years, that they just sort of keep on giving more and more money. And over the years, it's sort of become the worse you do as a school system, the more money you get from the federal government. And they're trying to sort of change that quietly.